In the depths of your unconscious slumber, a tremor begins to ripple, like the first crack in winter ice that heralds the coming spring. You sense, perhaps for the first time, that your life force has been scattered across 1,000 obligations that were never truly your own. There comes a moment in every soul's journey when the sleeper within begins to stir. It is not the gentle awakening of morning light filtering through familiar curtains, but something far more profound, a seismic shift in the very foundations of what you have called your life. This is the Great Awakening, the moment when the soul recognizes that it has been living in exile from itself, wearing masks that were crafted by others' hands, speaking words that were written by voices not your own. You have been walking through your days like a dreamer, moving through the motions of a life that feels increasingly hollow, increasingly foreign. The things that once brought satisfaction now taste like ash in your mouth. This awakening does not come gently. It arrives like lightning splitting the night sky, illuminating landscapes you never knew existed within yourself. The comfortable numbness that has protected you from the deeper questions of existence begins to crack and crumble. You feel exposed, vulnerable, as if someone has suddenly turned on all the lights in a room where you have been hiding in darkness for years. The persona you have worn so carefully, so diligently constructed to meet the world's expectations, begins to feel like a costume that no longer fits. You catch glimpses of yourself in mirrors and feel a strange disconnection, as if you are looking at a stranger who has borrowed your face. The words you speak sound hollow, echoing in the cavern of your chest like stones dropped into an empty well. You realize that you have been living your life for an audience that was never meant to judge your performance. In this moment of awakening, you begin to understand that your energy, that precious, finite resource of your being, has been dispersed like seeds scattered by an indifferent wind. You have given pieces of yourself to every demand, every expectation, every should and must that society has placed upon your shoulders. You have been the dutiful child, the responsible employee, the accommodating friend, the perfect partner, all roles that required you to contort yourself into shapes that your soul was never meant to inhabit. The stirring in your depths is the movement of your authentic self, the part of you that has been waiting in the wings of your consciousness, watching the play of your life unfold without ever being invited onto the stage. This is the self that knows your true name, the one that was given to you not by parents or society, but by the cosmos itself at the moment of your soul's conception. This self has been patient, oh so patient, but now it begins to make itself known through the language of discontent, through the persistent whisper that says, "This is not your life, this is not who you are meant to be." The Great Awakening is always accompanied by a sense of loss, for you begin to see clearly how much of your precious existence has been spent in service to dreams that were not your own. You mourn the years you gave to pursuits that left you feeling empty, the relationships that drained rather than nourished you, the choices you made from fear rather than love. This mourning is necessary, for you cannot step into your authentic power without first grieving what you are leaving behind. But alongside the grief comes something else, a quality of energy you may not have felt since childhood. It is the stirring of your own life force, no longer scattered, but beginning to collect itself, to remember its own shape and purpose. You feel it first as a restlessness, an inability to continue with business as usual. The meetings that once engaged you now feel like elaborate charades. The conversations that once satisfied you now ring hollow. You find yourself longing for something you cannot name, hungering for a kind of nourishment that the world as you have known it cannot provide. This is the moment when the soul begins its great work of reclamation. Like an archaeologist uncovering ancient treasures, you start to dig beneath the accumulated layers of conditioning, expectation. With each layer you remove, you discover artifacts of your true self, fragments of dreams you abandoned, pieces of your voice that you silenced, shadows of the person you might have become if you had not been so eager to please, so willing to conform. The awakening brings with it A new kind of seeing. Colors appear more vivid, as if you have been looking at the world through filtered glass and someone has suddenly removed the screen. You notice things that have always been there, but that your conditioned mind had learned to overlook: the way light falls across a table, the sound of your own breath, the feeling of your feet upon the earth. It is as if you are seeing your life for the first time, and in many ways you are. The Great Awakening marks the beginning of what Jung called the process of individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming who you truly are rather than who you have been conditioned to be. It is the first step on the path towards psychological and spiritual wholeness, the moment when you stop living your life as a reaction to external circumstances and begin living it as an expression of your deepest truth. As you stand at this threshold, you may feel afraid. The familiar, even if unsatisfying, offers a kind of security that the unknown cannot provide. But there is something else stirring alongside the fear, a quality of excitement, of anticipation, of rightness that tells you this is the direction your soul has always wanted to go. You are not falling apart, you are falling together. You are not losing yourself, you are finding yourself. The sleeper stirs, and with that stirring, your real life finally begins. The personas you have worn like ceremonial masks begin to feel foreign, each reflection showing you faces that belong to others' expectations. In this moment of recognition, the mirror of false identity cracks, revealing glimpses of the luminous self that has waited patiently beneath. Now comes the moment of terrible clarity, when the mirrors that have reflected back your borrowed identities begin to crack and splinter. You stand before the glass of your own awareness and see not one face, but dozens, a gallery of masks you have worn so long, they have begun to merge with your skin. Each reflection whispers a different story of who you are supposed to be, and suddenly you realize that none of these stories were ever truly yours. The mirror of the dutiful child shows you a face frozen in perpetual accommodation, eyes trained to scan for approval, lips curved in the practiced smile of compliance. This mask knows how to be good, how to never rock the boat, how to swallow words that might disturb the peace. But as you look deeper, you see the exhaustion behind those dutiful eyes, the way they have forgotten how to sparkle with genuine joy, because they have been so focused on reflecting back what others wanted to see. In yet another reflection, you see the perfect partner, features arranged in the expression of endless availability, the face that never says no, never asks for too much, never reveals the depth of its own needs, lest they prove inconvenient to someone else's comfort. This mask has learned to love by disappearing, to care by self-erasure, to connect by becoming whatever shape the other person requires. But in the shadows of this reflection, you see the outline of a heart that has never been allowed to express its own wild, untamed nature. Each mask tells a story of adaptation, of the countless ways you have learned to contort yourself, to fit into spaces that were never designed for your authentic shape. You have been a shape-shifter, a master of metamorphosis, but not in service of your own becoming, rather in service of others' ease, others' expectations, others' vision of who you should be. The shattering begins slowly, hairline fractures appearing at the edges of these false reflections. It starts with moments of deep fatigue, when you simply cannot summon the energy to perform your roles with the same enthusiasm. The mask of the eternal optimist slips, revealing glimpses of the sadness you have been trained to hide. The facade of perfect composure cracks, letting through flashes of the rage you have been taught to transform into sweetness. As the mirrors begin to fracture, you experience something that feels like vertigo, a disorienting sense that the ground of your identity is shifting beneath your feet. If you are not the good child, the responsible adult, the accommodating friend, then who are you? The question hangs in the air like incense, both sacred and unsettling. But in the spaces between the broken glass, something else begins to emerge, like light filtering through a shattered prism. Your authentic self starts to shine through in fragments and glimpses. You catch sight of eyes that hold their own fire, not borrowed from others' expectations. You see a mouth that knows how to speak truth, even when it might disturb the comfortable lies that others prefer. You glimpse hands that remember how to create beauty for its own sake rather than for approval. This is the luminous self that Jung spoke of, not the self that has been manufactured to meet external demands, but the self that has always existed at your core, waiting with infinite patience for the masks to fall away. The process of recognition is both liberation and loss. You mourn the safety of your false identities, even as you celebrate their dissolution. There was comfort in knowing exactly what was expected of you, in having a clear script to follow, in being able to predict others' responses to your carefully crafted personas. But this safety came at the cost of your soul's authentic expression. You begin to understand that these masks were not created in malice but in love, a misguided love perhaps, but love nonetheless. The dutiful child was born from a desire to maintain family harmony. The competent professional emerged from a wish to contribute meaningfully to the world. The accommodating partner arose from a genuine desire to create loving connection. Each persona was an attempt to meet a legitimate need, but over time they became prisons that confined rather than containers that nourished. As the mirrors crack and fall away, you experience moments of profound vertigo. Without the familiar markers of your constructed identity, you feel temporarily lost, like an actor who has forgotten their lines in the middle of a performance. The luminous self that begins to show itself is not another mask to be worn, but the absence of all masks, the face you were born with, the voice that speaks your truth, the heart that beats with its own rhythm, rather than trying to synchronize with everyone else's. This self does not seek approval because it has found its validation in the depths of its own being. It does not need to perform because its very existence is the performance it was meant to give. In these moments of recognition between the shattered mirrors, you taste freedom for perhaps the first time in your adult life. It is not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to be who you are, a freedom that carries with it both exhilaration and responsibility. For once you have seen your authentic face reflected in the broken glass, you can never again pretend that the masks are real. The mirror shatters not in anger, but in awakening, not in destruction, but in revelation. What breaks is not you, but the false images that have stood between you and your own luminous nature. In the clearing created by this gentle destruction, your true self finally has space to breathe, to stretch, to begin the sacred work of authentic becoming. From the depths of your disowned self, a voice calls out in recognition, not with malice but with the tenderness of a long-lost brother. The energy you've spent denying these aspects of your nature returns like rivers converging after a drought, nourishing the barren land. You have banished so much of yourself to this inner wilderness. The anger that might have protected your boundaries was cast out because good people don't get angry. The selfishness that might have honored your needs was rejected because worthy people always put others first. The wildness that might have brought you alive was suppressed because civilized people maintain control. The sexuality that might have connected you to your primal life force was shamed into hiding because pure people transcend such base desires. Each rejected aspect carries within it not just the energy you feared, but the gift that energy was meant to bring. The anger you have denied holds within it the fire of your authentic boundaries, the power to say no when your soul requires it. As you begin to sense the presence of these shadow aspects, you may feel a complex mixture of fear and fascination. There is something both terrifying and thrilling about approaching the parts of yourself you have worked so hard to keep hidden. It is like standing at the edge of a forest you have always been told is dangerous, only to discover that the sounds emerging from its depths are not the growls of predators, but the songs of your own voice, finally free to express its full range. The shadow does not seek to destroy the life you have built, but to complete it. It does not want to eliminate your capacity for kindness, but to ensure that your kindness springs from choice rather than compulsion. It does not wish to corrupt your goodness, but to ground it in authenticity rather than performance. The shadow is not your enemy. It is your unlived life, your unexpressed potential, your untapped reservoir of creative power. This integration does not mean acting out every impulse or embracing destructive behaviors. The shadow work that Jung described is not about becoming unconscious or irresponsible, but about becoming conscious and whole. It is about recognizing that the qualities you have banished often contain, in their essence, exactly what your conscious personality needs to become more balanced, more alive, more authentically powerful. The process begins with curiosity rather than judgment. Instead of asking, "How can I get rid of this aspect of myself?" you begin to ask, "What is this part of me trying to tell me? What need is it attempting to meet? What gift might it carry if it were allowed to express itself in healthy ways?" This shift from rejection to investigation changes everything, for it transforms the shadow from an enemy to be defeated into a teacher to be understood. You may discover that your repressed anger, when welcomed and listened to, reveals itself as a passionate advocate for justice, both for yourself and others. Your denied selfishness might transform into healthy self-care and appropriate boundary setting. Your suppressed wildness could emerge as creative spontaneity and authentic emotional expression. Your hidden sexuality might blossom into a connection with your life force that infuses everything you do with vitality and presence. The shadow's invitation is tender because it recognizes the pain of your long separation from these parts of yourself. It knows the exhaustion of trying to be only half of who you are, the loneliness of exiling aspects of your nature that long for integration and expression. When the shadow calls to you, it is not with the voice of temptation, but with the voice of homecoming, welcoming back the prodigal parts of your soul. This process of reclamation requires courage, for you must be willing to disappoint those who have loved you for your incompleteness, who have felt safe with you precisely because you have kept your full power under wraps. As you begin to integrate your shadow, you become less predictable, less controllable, less willing to sacrifice your authenticity for others' comfort. This can be threatening to those who have benefited from your self-diminishment. But the energy that returns to you through this integration is like nothing you have ever experienced. It is as if rivers that have been dammed for decades suddenly break free and rush toward the ocean of your being. You feel more alive, more creative, more capable of genuine intimacy, because you are no longer hiding half of yourself from view. You discover that wholeness does not make you perfect, it makes you real. The shadow's invitation is ultimately an invitation to power, not power over others, but power with life itself. It is the power to respond authentically to whatever arises, the power to love from your depths rather than your surfaces, the power to create from your truth rather than your conditioning. This is the energy you've spent denying, returning like rivers converging after a drought, ready to nourish the barren land of your partially lived life into full bloom. The personas you have worn like ceremonial masks begin to feel foreign, each reflection showing you faces that belong to others' expectations. In this moment of recognition, the mirror of false identity cracks, revealing glimpses of the luminous self that has waited patiently beneath. The mirror of the dutiful child shows you a face frozen in perpetual accommodation, eyes trained to scan for approval, lips curved in the practiced smile of compliance. This mask knows how to be good, how to never rock the boat, how to swallow words that might disturb the peace. But as you look deeper, you see the exhaustion behind those dutiful eyes, the way they have forgotten how to sparkle with genuine joy, because they have been so focused on reflecting back what others wanted to see. Another mirror reveals the competent professional, chin lifted in manufactured confidence, shoulders squared against the weight of responsibilities that were accepted not from passion but from obligation. This face knows every protocol, every expectation, every way to make itself indispensable to systems that have never truly valued its unique gifts. Yet beneath the polished surface, You glimpse the frustrated artist, the dreamer who has been buried alive under spreadsheets and strategic plans. In yet another reflection, you see the perfect partner, features arranged in the expression of endless availability, the face that never says no, never asks for too much, never reveals the depth of its own needs, lest they prove inconvenient to someone else's comfort. Each mask tells a story of adaptation, of the countless ways you have learned to contort yourself to fit into spaces that were never designed for your authentic shape. You have been a shapeshifter, a master of metamorphosis, but not in service of your own becoming, rather in service of others' ease, others' expectations, others' vision of who you should be. The shattering begins slowly, hairline fractures appearing at the edges of these false reflections. It starts with moments of deep fatigue, when you simply cannot summon the energy to perform your roles with the same enthusiasm. The mask of the eternal optimist slips, revealing glimpses of the sadness you have been trained to hide. The facade of perfect composure cracks, letting through flashes of the rage you have been taught to transform into sweetness. As the mirrors begin to fracture, you experience something that feels like vertigo, a disorienting sense that the ground of your identity is shifting beneath your feet. If you are not the good child, the responsible adult, the accommodating friend, then who are you? The question hangs in the air like incense, both sacred and unsettling. But in the spaces between the broken glass, something else begins to emerge. Like light filtering through a shattered prism, your authentic self starts to shine through in fragments and glimpses. You catch sight of eyes that hold their own fire, not borrowed from others' expectations. You see a mouth that knows how to speak truth, even when it might disturb the comfortable lies that others prefer. You glimpse hands that remember how to create beauty for its own sake, rather than for approval. This is the luminous self that Jung spoke of, not the self that has been manufactured to meet external demands, but the self that has always existed at your core, waiting with infinite patience for the masks to fall away. This self does not seek to please or to fit in. It seeks to express the unique frequency of consciousness that you were born to embody. The process of recognition is both liberation and loss. You mourn the safety of your false identities, even as you celebrate their dissolution. There was comfort in knowing exactly what was expected of you, in having a clear script to follow, in being able to predict others' responses to your carefully crafted personas. But this safety came at the cost of your soul's authentic expression. You begin to understand that these masks were not created in malice but in love, a misguided love perhaps, but love nonetheless. The dutiful child was born from a desire to maintain family harmony. The competent professional emerged from a wish to contribute meaningfully to the world. The accommodating partner arose from a genuine desire to create loving connection. Each persona was an attempt to meet a legitimate need, but over time they became prisons that confined rather than containers that nourished. The shattering of false reflections is not a violent destruction, but a gentle dissolution, like morning mist clearing to reveal the landscape that was always there. You do not need to hate or reject these aspects of yourself that have served for so long. Instead, you can honor them for the protection they provided, while recognizing that you have outgrown their limitations. As the mirrors crack and fall away, you experience moments of profound vertigo. Without the familiar markers of your constructed identity, you feel temporarily lost, like an actor who has forgotten their lines in the middle of a performance. But this lostness is not the confusion of disintegration. It is the spaciousness of possibility. In releasing who you thought you had to be, you create room for who you actually are to emerge. The luminous self that begins to show itself is not another mask to be worn, but the absence of all masks, the face you were born with, the voice that speaks your truth, the heart that beats with its own rhythm, rather than trying to synchronize with everyone else's. This self does not seek approval because it has found its validation in the depths of its own being. It does not need to perform because its very existence is the performance it was meant to give. In these moments of recognition between the shattered mirrors, you taste freedom for perhaps the first time in your adult life. It is not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to be who you are, a freedom that carries with it both exhilaration and responsibility. For once you have seen your authentic face reflected in the broken glass, you can never again pretend that the masks are real. The mirror shatters not in anger but in awakening, not in destruction but in revelation. What breaks is not you but the false images that have stood between you and your own luminous nature. In the clearing created by this gentle destruction, your true self finally has space to breathe, to stretch, to begin the sacred work of authentic becoming. From the depths of your disowned self, a voice calls out in recognition, not with malice, but with the tenderness of a long-lost brother. The energy you've spent denying these aspects of your nature returns like rivers converging after a drought, nourishing the barren land. There comes a moment in every soul's awakening when you must turn toward what you have spent your entire life running from. The shadow, that repository of all the parts of yourself you have deemed unacceptable, inappropriate, or incompatible with the image you have worked so hard to maintain, extends its hand in invitation. This is not the monster you have imagined lurking in the depths of your psyche, but something far more profound and necessary, the exiled sovereign of your disowned power. You have banished so much of yourself to this inner wilderness. The anger that might have protected your boundaries was cast out because good people don't get angry. The selfishness that might have honored your needs was rejected because worthy people always put others first. The wildness that might have brought you alive was suppressed because civilized people maintain control. The sexuality that might have connected you to your primal life force was shamed into hiding because pure people transcend such base desires. Each rejected aspect carries within it not just the energy you feared, but the gift that energy was meant to bring. The anger you have denied holds within it the fire of your authentic boundaries, the power to say no when your soul requires it. The selfishness you have judged contains the wisdom of self-preservation, the knowledge of what you need to thrive rather than merely survive. The wildness you have tamed carries the medicine of spontaneity, the ability to respond to life with genuine feeling rather than calculated appropriateness. You begin to understand that the energy you have spent in rejection and denial has been enormous, like a country that devotes half its resources to fighting a civil war. You have been divided against yourself, exhausting your life force in the effort to maintain the split between acceptable and unacceptable aspects of your nature. The shadow's invitation is an offer of peace, a chance to call home the exiled parts of yourself and discover what becomes possible when you are no longer at war with your own depths. This integration does not mean acting out every impulse or embracing destructive behaviors. The shadow work that Jung described is not about becoming unconscious or irresponsible, but about becoming conscious and whole. It is about recognizing that the qualities you have banished often contain, in their essence, exactly what your conscious personality needs to become more balanced, more alive, more authentically powerful. The process begins with curiosity rather than judgment. Instead of asking, "How can I get rid of this aspect of myself?" you begin to ask, "What is this part of me trying to tell me? What need is it attempting to meet? What gift might it carry if it were allowed to express itself in healthy ways?" This shift from rejection to investigation changes everything, for it transforms the shadow from an enemy to be defeated into a teacher to be understood. You may discover that your repressed anger, when welcomed and listened to, reveals itself as a passionate advocate for justice, both for yourself and others. Your denied selfishness might transform into healthy self-care and appropriate boundary setting. Your suppressed wildness could emerge as creative spontaneity and authentic emotional expression. Your hidden sexuality might blossom into a connection with your life force that infuses everything you do with vitality and presence. The shadow's invitation is tender because it recognizes the pain of your long separation from these parts of yourself. It knows the exhaustion of trying to be only half of who you are, the loneliness of exiling aspects of your nature that long for integration and expression. When the shadow calls to you, it is not with the voice of temptation, but with the voice of homecoming, welcoming back the prodigal parts of your soul. This process of reclamation requires courage, for you must be willing to disappoint those who have loved you for your incompleteness, who have felt safe with you precisely because you have kept your full power under wraps. As you begin to integrate your shadow, you become less predictable, less controllable, less willing to sacrifice your authenticity for others' comfort. This can be threatening to those who have benefited from your self-diminishment. But the energy that returns to you through this integration is like nothing you have ever experienced. It is as if rivers that have been dammed for decades suddenly break free and rush toward the ocean of your being. The shadow's invitation is ultimately an invitation to power, not power over others, but power with life itself. It is the power to respond authentically to whatever arises, the power to love from your depths rather than your surfaces, the power to create from your truth rather than your conditioning. A sacred solitude begins to call your name like an ancient hymn, not the loneliness of isolation, but the fullness of inner communion. In this chosen withdrawal from the world's constant demands, you discover the inexhaustible wellspring that has always lived within. There comes a time in the journey of awakening when the soul must turn away from the cacophony of external voices and descend into the sanctuary of its own depths. This is not the bitter withdrawal of defeat, nor the fearful retreat of the wounded, but the purposeful pilgrimage of one who has begun to understand that the answers they seek cannot be found in the marketplace of others' opinions. The hermit's journey calls to you now with the urgency of a bell tolling across a misty valley, summoning you home to yourself. You have spent so many years seeking validation, direction, and meaning in the external world, treating your inner landscape as a wasteland to be escaped, rather than a garden to be tended. You have consulted every oracle except the one that lives within your own heart, sought every teacher except the wisdom that whispers in the silence of your own being. The hermit's path is the radical act of turning toward this inner teacher, of recognizing that the guidance you have been seeking everywhere else has been waiting patiently in the depths of your own soul. This withdrawal is not a rejection of the world, but a temporary retreat for the purpose of renewal. Like the cycle of seasons, there are times when the soul must go dormant, must pull its energy inward, must rest in the dark earth of solitude, so that new growth can emerge. You have been living in a perpetual summer of external activity, giving and doing and performing without pause, and your spirit has become depleted, scattered like seeds blown too far from their source. The hermit's journey begins with the courage to disappoint. You must be willing to step away from the constant availability that others have come to expect, to say no to invitations that drain rather than nourish, to create boundaries around your time and energy that may initially feel selfish but are actually essential for your spiritual survival. This is not about becoming antisocial or bitter, but about recognizing that you cannot give what you do not have, cannot offer authentic presence when you have lost touch with your own center. In the beginning, the silence may feel uncomfortable, even threatening. You have become so accustomed to the noise of external stimulation that the absence of it can feel like death itself. You may find yourself reaching for distractions, for the familiar buzz of social media or the comfort of mindless entertainment, anything to fill the space that opens when you stop running from yourself. But if you can resist these impulses, if you can sit with the discomfort of your own presence, something miraculous begins to unfold. In this sacred solitude, you rediscover the art of communion with yourself. You learn to listen to the subtle rhythms of your own energy, to recognize when you are moving in harmony with your deeper nature, and when you are forcing yourself into patterns that create friction and exhaustion. You develop the capacity to feel your way through decisions rather than thinking your way through them, trusting the compass of your inner knowing rather than the maps drawn by others' expectations. The hermit's cave is not a place of deprivation, but of abundance, the abundance of undivided attention, of spaciousness, of the luxury of moving at your own pace without having to coordinate with anyone else's agenda. Here you can think long thoughts, feel deep feelings, follow threads of inspiration wherever they may lead without having to explain or justify your process to anyone else. You discover that solitude is not the absence of company, but the presence of your own authentic self. In this withdrawal, you begin to distinguish between loneliness and aloneness. Loneliness is the ache of separation, the feeling that you are cut off from love and connection. Aloneness, by contrast, is the fullness of your own presence, the recognition that you are complete unto yourself, even as you may choose to share that completeness with others. The hermit's journey teaches you that you cannot authentically connect with others until you have first learned to connect with yourself. This is where you encounter what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold paradox, to be simultaneously alone and connected, separate and unified, individual and universal. In the depths of your solitude, you touch something that transcends the personal, something that connects you to the larger web of existence in a way that no amount of social activity ever could. You discover that when you go deep enough into yourself, you find not isolation but communion with the very source of life itself. The hermit's journey is cyclical, not linear. There will be times when you emerge from your solitude refreshed and renewed, ready to engage with the world from a place of fullness rather than emptiness. And there will be times when you must return to the well, when the demands of external life begin to deplete your reserves, and you feel the call to withdraw once again. This is not a sign of weakness or antisocial tendencies, but the natural rhythm of a soul that has learned to honor its own needs for restoration and renewal. You begin to understand that the hermit's lantern, that symbol of inner illumination, is not meant to be hidden under a bushel, but to be carried into the world as a gift. The wisdom you discover in solitude, the peace you cultivate in withdrawal, the authenticity you develop in communion with yourself, these become offerings you can make to others, not from a place of depletion, but from the overflow of your own fullness. The sacred solitude transforms you from someone who seeks meaning in external circumstances to someone who creates meaning from the depths of their own being. You no longer need the world to be a certain way for you to be at peace. You carry that peace within you like a hidden flame that no external wind can extinguish. You become a wellspring rather than a drain, a source rather than a seeker. In this chosen withdrawal, you discover that the hermit's journey is not about escaping the world, but about finding your true place within it. When you know who you are in the depths of solitude, you can engage with others from a place of authenticity rather than need. When you have touched the inexhaustible wellspring within, you can give generously without fear of depletion. The hermit's path leads not away from love, but toward a love so profound that it needs no object, a connection so deep that it encompasses all of existence while remaining rooted in the sanctuary of your own awakened heart. The raw material of your scattered energies enters the crucible, where the base metal of obligation transforms into the gold of purpose. This is the nigredo, the necessary darkness before the dawn, where what you thought was loss reveals itself as profound liberation. Now begins the most mysterious and transformative phase of your journey, the alchemical fire that burns away everything false and refines what remains into something precious beyond measure. You have gathered the scattered fragments of yourself, recognized the masks that were never truly yours, embraced the shadow that carries your disowned power, and found the center that exists beyond the reach of external demands. Now all of this raw material, the confusion, the pain, the awakening, the integration, must be placed into the sacred vessel of transformation. The alchemists of old spoke of the opus contra naturama, the work against nature, but they did not mean working against the natural world. They meant working against the fallen nature of unconsciousness, against the gravitational pull towards sleep, against the tendency to live life by default rather than by design. You are entering this great work now, and the first stage, the nigrido or blackening, requires you to willingly enter into what appears to be dissolution, but is actually the beginning of your true formation. This is not the comfortable transformation promised by weekend workshops or self-help seminars. This is the profound alchemy that requires you to be willing to lose everything you think you know about yourself in order to discover who you actually are. The crucible is hot, and it will burn away everything that is not essential, everything that you have accumulated out of fear or conditioning, or the desperate desire to belong. What emerges from this fire will be unrecognizable to those who knew you before, and perhaps even to yourself. You feel the heat of this alchemical process in every cell of your being. There are days when you feel like you are coming apart at the seams, when the familiar structures of your identity seem to be melting like wax in flame. The person you used to be feels increasingly like a stranger, yet the person you are becoming remains mysterious, undefined. You exist in the liminal space between death and birth, in the dark chrysalis where transformation happens beyond the reach of consciousness or will. This nigredo phase brings with it a peculiar kind of suffering, not the suffering of victimhood or external circumstances, but the suffering of someone who is being purified by their own commitment to truth. Every false belief about yourself must be burned away. Every strategy you use to gain love and approval must be released. Every way you learn to manipulate your environment to feel safe must be surrendered. The fire does not discriminate between what you want to keep and what you are ready to release. It burns away everything that is not authentically you. In the heat of this transformation, you begin to understand what the mystics meant when they spoke of the dark night of the soul. This is not depression or despair, though it may sometimes feel similar. This is the necessary darkness that precedes all authentic rebirth, the fallow period when the old seed must completely dissolve before the new life can emerge. You are being composted back into your essential elements so that something unprecedented can grow from the rich soil of your becoming. The base metal of obligation, all those heavy responsibilities that you carried, not from joy but from duty, not from passion but from compulsion, begins to transform in the alchemical fire. What seemed like burden reveals itself as the raw material for purpose. The very struggles that felt like curses begin to show themselves as the curriculum your soul designed for its own awakening. The pain you thought was meaningless becomes the sacred wound through which your gifts enter the world. You discover that nothing was wasted, nothing was in vain. Every moment of feeling trapped was preparing you to recognize true freedom. Every experience of being misunderstood was teaching you to value authentic self-expression. Every relationship that required you to betray yourself was showing you the preciousness of integrity. The lead of your suffering is being transmuted into the gold of wisdom, not through bypassing the pain, but by allowing it to be completely felt, completely honored, completely transformed. This alchemical process operates according to laws that the rational mind cannot grasp. There are times when you feel like you are moving backward, when old patterns reassert themselves with surprising force. There are moments of such profound disorientation that you wonder if you have made a terrible mistake in beginning this journey. The fire burns away your illusions about linear progress, about neat stages of development, about being able to control or direct your own transformation. You learn to trust the process, even when you cannot understand it, to surrender to the intelligence of your own becoming, even when it leads you through territories that feel dangerous or unknown. You develop what the alchemists called the philosophical patience, the ability to wait in the darkness of not knowing, to tend the fire of your own transformation without demanding immediate results or clear signs of progress. The solve et coagula, dissolve and coagulate, becomes the rhythm of your days. Old structures dissolve to make way for new forms. Ancient griefs surface to be finally felt and released. Forgotten dreams emerge from the depths of memory. asking to be reconsidered in the light of your emerging authenticity. You are being unmade and remade simultaneously, and the process is both terrifying and exhilarating. In the depths of this alchemical fire, you begin to sense something that the old alchemists called the philosopher's stone, not a literal substance, but a state of being, a quality of consciousness that can transform everything it touches. You feel it growing within you like a pearl forming in the depths of an oyster, something precious being created from the very irritations and pressures that once seemed like obstacles to your happiness. This inner gold is not the gold of material success or external recognition. It is the gold of authentic being, of inner authority, of the capacity to live from your own center, regardless of external circumstances. It cannot be stolen or lost because it is not dependent on anything outside yourself. It is the treasure that emerges when you have been willing to lose everything else, the pearl of great price that makes all other pearls seem like costume jewelry. The alchemical fire burns until only what is essential remains. What emerges from this crucible is not a perfected version of who you used to be, but something entirely new, a being who has been forged in the fire of conscious transformation, who carries within themselves the philosopher's stone of authentic selfhood. You have been changed not just on the surface, but in the very substance of your being. The base metal of unconscious living has been transmuted into the gold of awakened existence, and nothing will ever be the same. The part of you that lived to satisfy others' hunger breathes its last, not in violence, but in the natural way. Autumn leaves release their hold. This death is not an ending, but a metamorphosis, as the chrysalis dissolves to birth the butterfly of authentic being. There comes a moment in every soul's journey when something must die for something greater to be born. This is not the literal death of the body, but the symbolic crucifixion of the false self, that carefully constructed identity that has spent its entire existence trying to earn love through performance, approval through accommodation, worth through the endless sacrifice of its own needs on the altar of others' comfort. The people-pleaser must die, and this death, though necessary, is perhaps the most challenging passage in the entire journey of awakening. You feel this death approaching long before it arrives. There are signs and portents, moments when the old strategies simply stop working, when the smile that once could smooth over any conflict feels like a mask made of lead, when the words "I'm fine" stick in your throat like broken glass. The people-pleaser senses its approaching obsolescence and may fight desperately to maintain its reign, manufacturing crises that require its particular skills, creating emergencies that only its self-sacrificing nature can resolve. But the time has come for this aspect of your psyche to lay down its burden, like a faithful servant who has worked beyond its strength. The people-pleaser has given everything it had to give. It has carried you through childhood's minefields, navigated the treacherous waters of family dysfunction, built bridges across the chasms created by others' emotional instability. It deserves honor for its service, even as it must be released from its duties. The dying process is gradual, like the way autumn transforms a forest. You begin to notice that you can no longer summon the energy to manage others' emotions with the same intensity. You may feel exposed and vulnerable as this protective identity begins to dissolve. Without the familiar armor of constant accommodation, you feel naked in the world, uncertain of how to navigate relationships when you are no longer willing to contort yourself into whatever shape others prefer. There may be a period of profound disorientation as you learn to speak from your truth rather than from others' expectations, to respond from your center rather than from their needs. Some people in your life may resist this transformation with surprising intensity. They had grown accustomed to your endless availability, your willingness to absorb their emotional overflow, your talent for making their problems disappear through your own strategic self-sacrifice. As you begin to establish boundaries, to say no when you mean no, to express your own needs with clarity and conviction, they may feel confused, abandoned, even betrayed. This resistance from others becomes part of the crucifixion process. You realize that much of what you believed was love was actually a transaction, your self-suppression, in exchange for their tolerance of your presence. The dying people-pleaser must face the painful truth that many relationships were built on your willingness to be less than you are, and that as you become more authentic, some connections may not survive the transformation. But in the depths of this symbolic death, something miraculous begins to occur. As the people-pleaser breathes its last, you feel something stirring in the depths of your being, not another identity to be worn, but the authentic self that has been waiting patiently beneath all the masks and performances. This is not a new creation, but an ancient remembering, the return of the one you were before you learned that love was something to be earned, rather than something you inherently deserved. The chrysalis phase that follows the death is a time of profound mystery. You exist in the space between worlds, no longer the person you used to be, but not yet fully emerged as who you are becoming. In this chrysalis time, you may feel like you are losing your mind as well as your identity. The familiar landmarks of your personality seem to have vanished, and you are not yet oriented to the new landscape of your authentic being. But gradually, miraculously, the butterfly begins to emerge. You discover that you can love without losing yourself, that you can care without taking responsibility for others' emotional states, that you can contribute to the world without sacrificing your own well-being. The authentic being that emerges from the death of the people-pleaser is not selfish or uncaring, but rather so rooted in its own worth that it can give generously without depletion. This new being knows how to love from fullness rather than emptiness, how to serve from choice rather than compulsion, how to connect with others while remaining true to itself. It has learned that the greatest gift you can give to the world is not your self-sacrifice but your authentic presence, not your accommodation but your truth, not your endless availability but your genuine love. The death of the people-pleaser is ultimately revealed to be not a death at all but a liberation, the freeing of your life force from the exhausting work of constant self-monitoring and adaptation. What you thought was your identity was actually your imprisonment, and what felt like death was actually the birth of your true life. The butterfly that emerges carries within its wings all the beauty that was hidden in the caterpillar, transformed and made radiant through the sacred process of conscious dissolution and rebirth. There comes a moment in the depths of your transformation when the world stops whispering and begins to sing. It is not a gradual shift, this return of the sacred, but rather like the sudden breaking of dawn after the longest night of the soul. One day you wake and notice that the coffee cup in your hands feels weighted with significance, as if it were a chalice holding not mere liquid, but the essence of morning itself, the promise of another day in which you will choose yourself again and again. This is what happens when you have finally stopped bleeding your life force into the endless hunger of others' expectations. The energy that once scattered like startled birds across the landscape of everyone else's needs has returned home, settled back into the nest of your own being with a kind of reverence, a quiet acknowledgement that this inner sanctuary has been long neglected and deserves to be tended with the care of a devotee approaching an altar. The numinous quality that now suffuses your ordinary moments is not something you have achieved or earned through spiritual practice or psychological work, though these may have prepared the ground. It is rather what naturally emerges when the psyche is no longer fragmented by the constant outward flow of attention and energy. You begin to notice that your morning routine has become a series of small ceremonies. The way you arrange your space, the deliberate choosing of what to wear, the careful preparation of food, all of these acts that once felt mechanical now pulse with intentionality. It is as if you have become the high priest or priestess of your own existence, recognizing that every choice you make is either an offering to the authentic self or a betrayal of it. There is no neutral ground in this new consciousness, no action that does not carry archetypal weight. This is the natural compensation for years of living, as if you were merely a supporting character in everyone else's story. The psyche, in its infinite wisdom, swings toward the opposite extreme with the force of a pendulum that has been held too long on one side. Where once every decision was filtered through the question, what will others think, or how can I best serve their needs? Now every choice emerges from the deeper inquiry, what serves the wholeness of my being? This is not narcissism, but its opposite, the recognition that you are responsible for carrying a unique note in the cosmic symphony, and that note can only be sounded through the instrument of an authentic, integrated life. The ordinary world becomes charged with symbolic meaning because you are finally present to inhabit it fully. The homeless person on the corner is no longer just someone to pity or help or ignore, but becomes a mirror reflecting the parts of yourself that have been cast out, the shadow aspects you have refused to acknowledge. The difficult conversation with a colleague transforms from mere workplace drama into an opportunity for the practice of sovereignty, a chance to speak your truth without needing to control how it is received. Even the traffic jam becomes a meditation on patience, on the way life sometimes requires us to simply be present with what is, without the frantic energy of trying to fix or change or escape. This shift in perception is what the ancient Greeks called theophany, the appearance of the divine in ordinary experience. But you understand now that the divine was always there. It was simply that your consciousness was too scattered, too concerned with maintaining the persona that others expected to perceive it. Your relationships begin to reorganize themselves around this new center of gravity. Some people, those who were drawn to your energy-giving nature, start to drift away like planets pulled out of orbit. This is not a rejection, but a natural consequence of no longer providing the energetic fuel that sustained those connections. Other relationships deepen and strengthen, as if they were always meant to exist on the foundation of mutual respect rather than one-sided giving. You discover that when you stop trying to be what others need you to be, you create space for genuine intimacy to emerge, the kind that can only exist between two whole beings rather than between a giver and a taker. The work you do in the world takes on a different quality as well, where once you might have approached your responsibilities with a sense of duty or obligation. Now you find yourself asking different questions. How does this serve the larger pattern of my becoming? What aspect of my authentic nature wants to express itself through this task? Even mundane activities, like paying bills or cleaning your living space, become acts of self-love, ways of honoring the vessel that carries your consciousness through this incarnation. Now, as you learn to be a good steward of your energy, you discover that you actually have more to offer the world, not less, but it flows from a different source, not from the desperate need to be needed, not from the compulsive giving that masks a deep fear of abandonment, but from the overflow of a cup that is finally full. This is the paradox that those still caught in the pattern of energy depletion cannot understand, that by serving yourself first, you become capable of truly serving others. The sacred quality that now permeates your existence is not a spiritual bypassing of the difficulties of human life, but rather a deeper engagement with them. You still experience loss, disappointment, conflict, and uncertainty, but these experiences no longer threaten to unravel you because they are held within a larger container of meaning. Each challenge becomes an opportunity for the further refinement of your authentic nature, each difficulty a sacred task assigned by the self to strengthen and deepen your capacity to live from truth. This is what it means for life to become sacred again, not that it becomes easier or more comfortable, but that it becomes more real, more aligned with the archetypal patterns that govern the soul's journey toward wholeness. You recognize yourself as both the protagonist and the witness of your own myth, the hero of your own journey, and the wise narrator who can see the larger pattern being woven through the apparent chaos of daily experience. In this newfound sacredness, even your solitude takes on a different quality. Where once being alone might have felt like exile from the community of others, now it feels like a homecoming to yourself. You understand that solitude is not the absence of relationship, but the foundation upon which all authentic relationships must be built. In learning to be good company for yourself, you become capable of genuine companionship with others. The temple of your ordinary life has been consecrated not through ritual or ceremony, but through the simple act of coming home to yourself, of recognizing that the energy you carry is sacred and deserves to be protected and honored. In this recognition, every moment becomes an offering, every choice a prayer, every day a new opportunity to live from the center of your authentic being, rather than from the scattered periphery of others' expectations. This is the return of the numinous, not as something foreign or otherworldly, but as the natural radiance of a consciousness that has finally learned to gather itself home, to stop seeking outside what can only be found within, to become the guardian of its own sacred flame, rather than the endless fuel for everyone else's fire. The great wheel of the psyche turns according to laws as immutable as those that govern the tides and seasons. Jung called this principle enantiodromia, the tendency of things to swing into their opposite when pushed to an extreme. And now, in the depths of your transformation, you witness this cosmic law playing out with startling clarity in the landscape of your own soul. This movement is not gentle or gradual. Like all true compensations of the psyche, it arrives with the force of a reckoning, demanding that you embrace what you have spent a lifetime rejecting. The very qualities that once horrified you, the ability to say no without explanation, the capacity to put your own needs first, the willingness to disappoint others in service of your authentic truth, now emerge as necessary virtues, as essential skills in the art of conscious living. You find yourself doing things that would have been unthinkable in your former life of endless accommodation. You cancel plans because you need solitude. You speak your truth even when it creates tension. You stop responding to every request for your time and energy, as if it were a divine commandment requiring immediate obedience. These acts feel revolutionary because they represent nothing less than the overthrow of an internal tyranny that has governed your life for far too long. This is where Jung's understanding of compensation becomes most illuminating. The psyche, in its infinite wisdom, will always seek balance. Years of extreme giving must be balanced by a period of what appears to be extreme taking, though what you are really taking back is not something that belonged to others, but something that was always rightfully yours. The energy required to fuel your own individuation process, the attention necessary to tend your own inner garden, the love that must first fill your own cup before it can overflow to others. The world around you struggles to understand this transformation because it threatens the comfortable arrangements that were built on your willingness to sacrifice yourself. The colleague who could always count on you to take on extra work now faces the reality that you have boundaries. The family member who saw you as the eternal caretaker now must learn to tend their own emotional needs. The friend who used you as an unpaid therapist now discovers that you too have an inner life that deserves attention and care. This discernment brings its own kind of grief. There is sorrow in recognizing how many relationships in your life were built on an unconscious contract of your diminishment. There is pain in discovering that some people who claimed to love you were actually in love with your willingness to disappear in service of their needs. But this grief is also sacred, for it marks the death of illusions that were preventing you from experiencing authentic intimacy. The swing toward what others perceive as selfishness is actually a swing towards selfhood, the recognition that you are not a supporting character in everyone else's story, but the protagonist of your own myth. This shift requires you to develop muscles you never knew you had. The strength to hold your ground when others pressure you to return to your old patterns. The courage to trust your own inner knowing, even when it contradicts the opinions of those around you. The wisdom to distinguish between genuine care and manipulative attempts to restore the status quo. As this compensatory movement deepens, you begin to understand that what you once labeled as selfishness is actually the foundation of all authentic service. The mother who does not tend her own well-being cannot truly nurture her children. The healer who does not protect his own energy cannot offer genuine healing. The teacher who sacrifices her own learning cannot guide others toward wisdom. You are discovering that the care of the self is not the opposite of care for others, but the prerequisite for it. This realization brings with it a profound shift in how you understand love itself. The love you once offered from a place of depletion, urgent, anxious, dependent on being needed, is revealed to have been a form of unconscious violence, both toward yourself and toward those you claim to serve. True love, you now understand, can only flow from fullness, from a self that is so secure in its own worth that it can offer genuine gifts rather than desperate bargains for belonging. The practical implications of this shift ripple through every area of your life. Your calendar begins to reflect your actual priorities rather than your compulsive need to be available to everyone. Your finances improve as you stop giving money you cannot afford to people who never learned to manage their own resources. Your health strengthens as you no longer sacrifice sleep, nutrition, and exercise in service of others' immediate wants. Your creativity flourishes as you reclaim the time and energy that were once scattered across the landscape of everyone else's dramas and crises. This modeling is itself a form of service, though it bears no resemblance to the martyrdom you once mistook for virtue. By refusing to participate in relationships built on your diminishment, you create space for others to discover their own capacity for wholeness. By demonstrating that it is possible to love without losing yourself, you offer a template for healthier connections. By showing that boundaries are expressions of self-respect rather than selfishness, you give others permission to honor their own limits. The dance of opposites that Jung described is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process of balance and rebalance. There will be times when the pendulum swings too far toward what appears to be selfishness, and you will need to make corrections. There will be moments when old patterns reassert themselves, and you will need to consciously choose the more difficult path of self-honoring. But now you have tasted what it feels like to live from your own center, rather than from the scattered periphery of others' expectations, and this knowing becomes an inner compass that guides you back to balance whenever you begin to drift toward the old extremes. The compensatory movement that once felt like selfishness reveals itself to be something far more profound, the courageous act of claiming your rightful place in the community of beings, not as a servant or a savior, but as an equal participant in the great work of conscious evolution. The wounds that once seemed like evidence of your failure now reveal themselves as the very instruments of your transformation, like the Japanese art of kintsugi, where broken pottery is mended with gold. Your energy depletion has left golden seams of wisdom running through the landscape of your psyche. What you thought was destruction was actually deconstruction, the necessary breaking apart of false structures so that something truer could emerge from the rubble. You understand now that every moment you gave beyond your capacity, every time you said yes when your soul was screaming no, every instance of self-abandonment in service of others' needs was carving you hollow, creating space for a deeper knowing to take root. The pain of those years was not meaningless suffering, but rather the chisel strokes of an invisible sculptor, shaping you into an instrument capable of recognizing and healing similar wounds in others. But this is not the wounded healer who helps from a place of ongoing bleeding, who mistakes their own unhealed trauma for empathy. No, this is something far more refined, the one who has been broken and remade, who has descended into the underworld of their own depletion and returned with the medicine that can only be found there. Your wounds have been metabolized into wisdom, your suffering transformed into a form of sacred knowledge that cannot be taught, but only lived, and then shared through presence, rather than prescription. The people who are drawn to you now are different from those who were attracted to your former boundaryless giving. They come not seeking someone to drain, but someone who understands the territory they are navigating. They recognize in you the rare combination of deep compassion and clear boundaries, the ability to offer support without losing yourself in their struggle. You have become a lighthouse rather than a life raft, providing guidance and illumination while remaining anchored to your own foundation. You discover that your capacity to help others is actually greater now than it was when you gave compulsively from depletion, but the quality of that help has transformed completely. Where once you might have rushed in to rescue and fix, now you hold space for others to find their own strength. Where you once gave advice from anxiety, now you offer presence from peace. The difference is profound. It is the difference between feeding someone fish and teaching them to fish, between enabling dependence and fostering empowerment. This transformation teaches you about the nature of true service. You learn that the most healing thing you can offer another person is not the endless supply of your energy, but rather the living example of what it looks like to honor your own wholeness while remaining genuinely caring. Your very presence becomes a teaching, demonstrating that it is possible to love without losing yourself, to care without carrying others' burdens as if they were your own. The irony is exquisite and perfect. In learning to be selfish in the sacred sense, you have become capable of selfless service in the truest sense. But this selflessness is not self-erasure. It is the overflow of a self so full and integrated that it can afford to give without diminishment. This is the wounded healer's greatest gift, the knowledge that healing comes not from the sacrifice of one's wholeness, but from the claiming of it. You begin to understand that your years of energy depletion were a form of spiritual initiation, though you did not recognize it as such at the time. Like the shamanic tradition of dismemberment and reconstitution, you had to be completely broken down before you could be rebuilt in a form capable of serving both yourself and others from a place of authentic power. The pain was real, the suffering genuine, but it was not meaningless. It was the birth canal through which your true self emerged. This understanding brings a curious form of gratitude for the very experiences that once seemed to be destroying you. Not gratitude for the pain itself, but gratitude for what the pain revealed and what it ultimately made possible. The people you serve now receive something qualitatively different from what you offered in your depleted state. They receive the gift of being truly seen, rather than being used to fill your own emotional needs. They receive compassion that does not come with hidden strings attached, support that does not create dependence, love that does not demand gratitude or reciprocation. Your own healing journey becomes a template that others can follow, not through imitation but through inspiration. They see in you the possibility of transformation, the evidence that it is possible to emerge from the underworld of self-abandonment, not as a victim, but as a victor, not broken but beautifully reassembled with golden seams of wisdom, holding all the pieces together in a pattern more beautiful than the original wholeness. This is the mysterious alchemy of the wounded healer, the transformation of lead into gold, of suffering into wisdom, of depletion into abundance. You have become living proof that the darkest experiences can become the source of the greatest gifts, that the very wounds that seemed to be destroying you were actually preparing you to serve life in a way that was previously impossible. The medicine you now carry is not something you dispense, but something you embody. It is the medicine of integration, of wholeness reclaimed, of boundaries honored, of service offered from fullness rather than emptiness. And in carrying this medicine, in the deepest chambers of your transformation, a sacred fire burns with the intensity of 1,000 suns. This is not the gentle flame of candlelight meditation or the warm glow of self-acceptance, but the white-hot forge of individuation itself, that mysterious process Jung identified as the central task of human existence. Here, in this crucible of consciousness, all the scattered fragments of your being are melted down and recast into something approaching wholeness. What burns in this fire is everything that is not truly you. The false persona you constructed to win approval crackles and dissolves like paper in the flames. The people-pleasing strategies that once seemed so essential to your survival melt away like dross separated from gold. The parts of yourself that you banished to the shadow realm, your anger, your selfishness, your capacity for judgment, are retrieved from exile and offered to the flames not for destruction, but for purification, for integration into the larger wholeness that you are becoming. This process is both terrifying and exhilarating. To stand before the fire of your own becoming and watch as everything you thought you were burns away requires a courage that most never develop. In the flames, you witness the reunion of aspects of yourself that have been at war for decades. The part of you that gives endlessly and the part that wants to receive embrace like long-lost lovers. The self that seeks approval and the self that rebels against authority discover they are not enemies but complementary forces in the dance of authentic expression. The light you have cultivated and the darkness you have rejected begin to move together in a spiral dance that generates more energy than either could produce alone. This is the sacred marriage that the alchemists wrote about in their cryptic texts, not the union of two separate beings, but the internal wedding of the masculine and feminine principles within your own psyche. The masculine aspect, focused, discriminating, capable of decisive action, joins with the feminine principle, receptive, intuitive, flowing with the deeper currents of life. When these inner opposites cease their warfare and begin their collaboration, you discover a power you never knew you possessed. The fire reveals that what you thought were your weaknesses were actually your greatest strengths in disguise. The sensitivity that made you vulnerable to others' demands is the same quality that allows you to perceive subtle energies and respond to beauty. The need for approval that once enslaved you contains within it a genuine desire for authentic connection and meaningful contribution. Even your capacity for self-abandonment, when transformed by the fire, becomes a remarkable ability to surrender to the greater intelligence of life while maintaining your essential boundaries. As the flames work their magic, you begin to understand that individuation is not about becoming someone different, but about becoming more fully who you have always been beneath the layers of conditioning and compromise. The fire burns away the false additions while revealing the golden core that was always there, waiting to be discovered. You are not creating a new self but uncovering your original face, as the Zen masters would say, the authentic being that existed before you learned to fragment yourself in service of others' expectations. This process requires you to develop what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold tension between opposites without collapsing into either extreme. Others around you sense the change, even when they cannot name it. There is something different about your presence now, a solidity that was not there before, a quiet authority that needs no external validation. You speak less but say more. You move with greater intention and less hurry. Your very being radiates the kind of centeredness that can only come from internal integration, from the marriage of all your scattered parts into a unified whole. The fire teaches you that wholeness is not a static state, but a dynamic process of constant rebalancing. Each day brings new opportunities to choose integration over fragmentation, authenticity over accommodation, truth over convenience. The forge of individuation never truly cools completely. It remains available throughout your life as the sacred space where ongoing transformation can occur. In this crucible of consciousness, you discover that you are both the metal being forged and the smith doing the forging. You are simultaneously the raw material of your own transformation and the conscious agent choosing how that transformation unfolds. This paradox, being both subject and object of your own becoming, is perhaps the deepest mystery of human existence, and one that can only be understood through direct experience rather than intellectual analysis. The fire reveals the ultimate truth that Jung spent his lifetime articulating, that each human being carries within them a unique constellation of possibilities that can only be actualized through the courageous work of individuation. You are not meant to be a carbon copy of anyone else, not designed to fulfill others' visions of who you should be, but called to become the fullest expression of your own authentic nature. As the flames continue their work, you understand that this fire is not something you control, but something you participate in. The intelligence orchestrating your transformation is larger than your personal will, wiser than your conscious understanding, more loving than your deepest compassion. You learn to surrender to this process while remaining fully engaged in it, to trust the fire while continuing to feed it with your conscious choices. The integrated self that emerges from this forge is not perfect in the conventional sense. It still contains contradictions, limitations, and areas for continued growth. But it is whole in a way that transcends perfection, unified in its very multiplicity, strong in its acceptance of vulnerability. This is the golden child of your own inner marriage, the fruit of the sacred union between all the aspects of yourself that were once at war. Standing before the fire of your own individuation, you realize that this is what you were always moving toward, not the endless accommodation that once defined your life, but this sacred work of becoming fully yourself. The energy you once scattered to the winds has returned home to fuel this inner transformation. And in this return you discover not selfishness, but the most profound form of service, becoming the unique gift to the world that only you can be. In the most sacred chamber of your transformed consciousness, an ancient wedding is taking place, not the kind witnessed by external guests or celebrated with ritual and ceremony, but the mystical union that the alchemists called the hieros gamos, the sacred marriage between the fundamental opposites within your own being. In this inner sanctuary that you have carved out through months or years of saying no to others' demands on your energy, the masculine and feminine principles that live within every human soul finally cease their eternal warfare and move toward each other with the recognition of long-separated lovers. This is not the marriage of convenience that so many outer relationships become, built on mutual needs and unconscious contracts of diminishment. This is the union of wholeness with wholeness, the wedding between aspects of yourself that were never truly separate, but only appeared to be divided by the fragmenting pressures of a world that demanded you choose sides in battles that were never meant to be fought. The masculine within you, focused, discriminating, capable of clear boundaries and decisive action, extends its hand to the feminine, receptive, intuitive, flowing with the deeper currents of life and love. You can feel this marriage taking place in your body as surely as if it were happening in the physical world. There is a settling, a coming home, a profound relaxation that occurs when internal warfare ceases and collaboration begins. The tension you carried for so long between being strong and being vulnerable, between caring for yourself and caring for others, between independence and connection, all of these supposed contradictions reveal themselves to have been false dichotomies, artificial divisions that were preventing you from accessing your full power. In this inner wedding chamber, the giver and the receiver within you meet for the first time as equals. The part of you that has learned to pour out endless energy in service of others' needs sits down across from the part that has learned to protect and honor your own boundaries. Instead of the eternal conflict that once raged between them, they begin to dance together, each recognizing the other as a necessary partner in the complex choreography of authentic living. The masculine principle within you no longer needs to be harsh or dominating to maintain boundaries. It becomes instead a loving protector of the sacred flame that burns at your center, a wise guardian who knows when to say yes and when to say no, when to engage and when to retreat. This inner masculine has learned the difference between healthy assertion and aggressive defense, between strength and hardness, between clarity and rigidity. Meanwhile, the feminine principle no longer equates receptivity with boundarylessness or compassion with self-sacrifice. She becomes instead a wise vessel, capable of receiving only what truly serves the wholeness of your being, while allowing everything else to flow through without attachment. This inner feminine knows how to be open without being available to everyone, how to love without losing herself, how to nurture without depleting her own life force. Together, these reunited lovers create within you a completeness that needs nothing from the outside world to feel whole. This internal marriage transforms every external relationship in your life. No longer do you approach others from a place of emptiness seeking to be filled, nor from a place of compulsive fullness needing to empty yourself into their lives. You meet others now from wholeness, capable of genuine intimacy because you no longer need them to complete you. You can love without attachment to outcome, give without keeping score, receive without guilt or obligation. The union of opposites within you creates what Jung called the transcendent function, a mysterious capacity to hold paradox without needing to resolve it into false simplicity. You discover that you can be both independent and interdependent, both self-caring and genuinely caring toward others, both strong in your boundaries and soft in your heart. These are not contradictions to be solved, but complementary aspects of a mature consciousness that has learned to dance with complexity rather than flee from it into rigid positions. In this sacred marriage, your relationship with solitude transforms completely. Where once being alone might have felt like exile from the community of connection, now it feels like a honeymoon with yourself, a delicious retreat into the company of your own integrated being. You discover that you are never truly alone because you carry within you this divine couple, this eternal conversation between the active and receptive principles that generate the creative energy of authentic living. This inner wedding also heals the ancient split between mind and body, thought and feeling, spirit and matter. Your masculine principle no longer tries to transcend or control your emotional and physical nature, while your feminine principle no longer resents the discriminating power of clear thinking and decisive action. Instead, they work together as partners in the dance of incarnated consciousness, each contributing their unique gifts to the project of living authentically in a complex world. The completeness that emerges from this sacred marriage radiates outward like light through clear crystal. Others sense in you a quality they may not be able to name, but which draws them like moths to flame. The presence of someone who is not seeking anything from them, not trying to fix or change or improve them, but simply radiating the wholeness that comes from internal integration. This is a form of service more profound than any you offered in your days of compulsive giving, because it offers others a living example of what integration looks like. You understand now that this inner marriage was always the true goal of your individuation journey. All the work of establishing boundaries, of saying no to others' demands, of reclaiming your scattered energy, was not ultimately about learning to be selfish, but about creating the conditions in which this sacred union could take place. You had to stop fragmenting yourself in service of others' needs, in order to gather all your parts together in one place long enough for them to recognize each other and fall in love. This is the great secret that the mystics and depth psychologists have always known, but rarely speak directly, that the love we seek in the world is available within our own consciousness, once we stop scattering our attention and energy in all directions, and allow the fundamental opposites within our being to move toward each other with curiosity and compassion, rather than fear and rejection. The sacred marriage within you is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process of deepening intimacy between these inner partners. Each day brings new opportunities for the masculine and feminine principles to collaborate more skillfully, to dance together more beautifully, to create through their union new possibilities for authentic expression and genuine service. In this inner wedding chamber, you become both bride and groom, witness and participant, celebrant and celebration itself. The love that flows between these reunited aspects of your being is the same love that moves the sun and stars, the creative force that animates all of existence. By allowing this marriage to take place within your own consciousness, you become a conduit for this cosmic love to flow into the world, not through compulsive giving or self-sacrifice, but through the simple radiance of your integrated being. This is wholeness not as static perfection, but as dynamic completeness, not as the absence of conflict, but as the capacity to hold tension creatively, not as independence from others, but as the freedom to relate authentically from your own center, rather than from the scattered periphery of others' expectations. In this sacred marriage, you discover that the energy you once gave away so freely was never really yours to give. It belonged to this inner union, this divine conversation that generates the power to live authentically and love genuinely in a world that desperately needs both. Having touched the source of your own being in the sacred marriage of your inner opposites, you now face the ultimate test of integration, returning to the ordinary world, not as one who has escaped its complexity, but as one who has remembered how to navigate it from wholeness rather than fragmentation. This is the final stage of the hero's journey that Campbell mapped so eloquently, the return to the marketplace carrying the treasure you have won in the depths of your own transformation. But the world you re-enter is both exactly the same and completely different. The same people make the same demands. The same systems operate according to the same unconscious patterns of energy exchange. The same expectations hover in the air like invisible nets waiting to catch you and pull you back into the old patterns of self-abandonment. Yet everything has changed because you have changed, and you carry within your being a flame that cannot be extinguished by external circumstances. This flame is not the frantic energy you once scattered in all directions, desperately trying to meet everyone's needs while neglecting your own. It is instead the steady radiance of integrated consciousness, the quiet authority of someone who has learned to live from their center rather than from the periphery of others' approval. You move through the world now like a lighthouse, fixed in your foundation, consistent in your beacon, offering guidance to those who seek it while never abandoning your post to chase after ships that refuse to heed your light. The colleagues who once relied on your boundaryless availability must now learn to relate to this new version of you. Some discover, to their surprise, that they actually prefer this clearer, more authentic interaction. They find relief in knowing where they stand with you, in encountering someone who says what they mean and means what they say. Others struggle with the change, missing the old dynamics where they could dump their emotional overflow into the willing vessel of your endless accommodation. In your family system, the changes ripple outward like stones thrown into still water. The role you once played, the eternal caretaker, the emotional sponge, the one who could always be counted on to sacrifice their own needs for the family's comfort, sits empty now, and others must either step into their own maturity or continue their patterns of dependence without your participation. This shift often reveals the hidden dynamics that were always present, but masked by your compulsive giving. Some family members rise to the occasion, discovering capacities they never knew they had when they could no longer rely on you to handle their emotional regulation. Others may struggle with resentment or confusion, projecting their own fears of abandonment onto your healthy boundaries. You learn to hold space for their feelings without taking responsibility for managing them, offering compassion without compromising your integrity. Your presence in social situations becomes a different kind of teaching than you ever offered through your words or actions in the past. Simply by being someone who is comfortable with themselves, who doesn't need external validation to feel worthy, who can say no without lengthy explanations or apologies, you demonstrate possibilities that others may never have witnessed before. This is evangelism in the truest sense, the spreading of good news not through preaching but through embodiment. People begin to seek you out not because you give them what they want, but because you offer them something they didn't know they needed. The experience of being in relationship with someone who is genuinely present rather than performing, someone who loves without trying to control outcomes, someone who serves without sacrificing their own well-being. Your very existence becomes a quiet rebellion against the cultural mythology that equates love with self-erasure. The work you do in the world takes on a different quality as well, where once you might have approached your professional responsibilities with a sense of duty mixed with resentment, now you engage from a place of authentic choice. You say yes to projects that align with your values and gifts, and no to those that would require you to fragment yourself or compromise your integrity. This selectivity, rather than limiting your opportunities, often opens doors to work that is more meaningful and better compensated. Your creativity flourishes in ways you never imagined possible when your energy was scattered across the landscape of everyone else's needs. The flame you carry within illuminates not only your own path, but creates new possibilities for artistic expression, innovative solutions, and authentic leadership. you discover that the energy you once gave away compulsively was the very fuel needed for your own creative fire. As you move through your daily routine, paying bills, shopping for groceries, attending meetings, having conversations, you carry this flame of integrated consciousness into each interaction. You are no longer performing the role of the helpful person, or the accommodating colleague, or the selfless friend. You are simply being yourself, and this authenticity creates ripples of permission around you for others to risk being themselves as well. The marketplace reveals itself to be a monastery in disguise, every interaction an opportunity to practice the presence you have cultivated in solitude. The difficult customer becomes a chance to maintain your boundaries while remaining kind. The demanding boss becomes an opportunity to speak your truth without attachment to how it is received. The needy friend becomes a practice in offering compassion without compromising your own well-being. You understand now that the journey inward was never meant to be an escape from the world, but a preparation for engaging with it more skillfully. The boundaries you learned to establish, the self-care practices you developed, the integration you achieved. All of this was training for this moment when you would return to ordinary life, carrying extraordinary wisdom about how to love without losing yourself, how to serve without sacrificing your authenticity, how to remain connected to others while staying rooted in your own center. The flame you carry is not diminished by sharing it, but grows brighter through expression. Each authentic interaction, each boundary honored, each choice made from integrity rather than fear, adds fuel to the fire. You become a living demonstration that it is possible to be both fully individual and genuinely connected, both deeply self-caring and authentically loving toward others. This is the great work that Jung called individuation in service to the collective, becoming so fully yourself that you have something genuinely unique to offer the world. Not the false uniqueness of personality quirks or surface preferences, but the deep originality of a consciousness that has integrated its opposites and learned to move through life from wholeness rather than fragmentation. Your very presence becomes a form of service more profound than any you offered in your days of compulsive giving. You serve not by sacrificing yourself, but by embodying the possibility of wholeness, not by fixing others, but by demonstrating that integration is possible, not by giving away your energy, but by radiating the steady flame of authentic being. This is how the world is transformed, not through grand gestures or heroic sacrifices, but through individuals who have done the inner work of becoming whole and who carry that wholeness back into the marketplace of human interaction. In the deepest sanctum of your transformed being, you have become what the ancients called a keeper of the sacred flame. This is not a role you auditioned for, or a responsibility thrust upon you by external authority, but rather the natural culmination of your journey from fragmentation to wholeness, from energy depletion to sovereign stewardship of your own life force. You understand now that the energy you carry is not a personal possession to be hoarded, nor a commodity to be traded, but a sacred trust, a unique expression of the universal life force that flows through all beings, manifesting through you in a way that has never existed before and will never exist again. This flame that burns within you is both utterly personal and completely transpersonal. It carries your individual essence, the particular constellation of gifts, wounds, experiences, and insights that make you irreplaceable in the grand symphony of existence. Yet it is also connected to the same source that lights every star, grows every flower, beats every heart. You have become a conscious participant in the great work of evolution, tending your own piece of the infinite fire with the devotion of a temple priest who knows that the flame he guards is simultaneously his own and everyone's. The guardianship you have assumed is not a burden but a profound privilege, though it requires a vigilance that never sleeps. You have learned to recognize the subtle signs that indicate when your flame is being threatened, the familiar tug of old patterns trying to reassert themselves, the seductive whisper of voices that suggest you should give just a little more, sacrifice just a little bit of your carefully maintained boundaries for the sake of keeping peace or avoiding conflict. These temptations arrive not as obvious attacks but as reasonable requests, loving concerns, urgent needs that surely justify a temporary return to your old ways of being. But you have developed what might be called a spiritual immune system, an inner capacity to distinguish between genuine calls to service and unconscious invitations to self-abandonment. This discernment is perhaps the most precious gift of your transformation, the ability to sense the difference between opportunities that will feed your flame and those that will drain it, between relationships that honor your wholeness and those that require your fragmentation, between work that expresses your authentic nature and labor that demands you betray your deepest values. The flame requires different kinds of tending in different seasons of your life. Sometimes it needs the fierce protection of clear boundaries, the unwavering no that refuses to allow others' unconscious patterns to consume what you have worked so hard to cultivate. Other times it needs the gentle nurturing of solitude, the quiet space where you can listen to your own inner voice without the constant noise of others' opinions and expectations. And sometimes it needs the joy of expression, the delight of sharing your gifts with those who can receive them without trying to possess or control you. You have discovered that this flame is both fragile and indestructible, vulnerable to the wrong kind of attention, yet essentially unquenchable once it has been properly kindled. It can be dimmed by the wrong relationships, clouded by environments that do not honor your true nature, or scattered by the attempt to be all things to all people. Yet even when it seems to flicker low, it cannot be entirely extinguished because it is connected to the inexhaustible source of all energy, all creativity, all love. Your role as guardian has taught you that protection and sharing are not opposite activities but complementary aspects of wise stewardship. The flame must be protected from those who would consume it carelessly, but it must also be shared with those who can receive its light without trying to own it. You have learned to distinguish between these two types of people, those who approach your energy like hungry ghosts seeking to fill their own emptiness, and those who meet your light with their own inner radiance, creating the kind of mutual illumination that brightens both flames without diminishing either. This discernment extends to every area of your life. You guard your time as carefully as a miser guards gold, not from selfishness, but from the recognition that time is the container within which your flame can express itself most fully. You protect your attention from the endless distractions that a hyper-connected world offers, understanding that scattered attention creates scattered energy, which weakens the very flame you are called to tend. You choose your environments, your relationships, your commitments with the careful consideration of someone who knows that every choice either feeds or depletes the sacred fire within. Yet this protection never hardens into cynicism or isolation. You remain open to genuine connection, available for authentic service, willing to share your gifts with those who can receive them appropriately. The difference is that you now choose these interactions consciously, rather than falling into them compulsively. You give from fullness rather than emptiness, from choice rather than obligation, from love rather than fear. The flame you tend has taught you that true service to others begins with fierce loyalty to your own wholeness. This is perhaps the most counterintuitive lesson of your transformation, that the more carefully you guard your own energy, the more you actually have to offer others. The flame that is properly tended burns brighter and steadier, casting more light into the darkness around it. The energy that is wisely stewarded multiplies and grows, creating an abundance that can be shared without depletion. You have become a living demonstration of what Jung called the principle of individuation in service to the collective. By doing the inner work necessary to become fully yourself, you have discovered your unique contribution to the larger tapestry of human experience. Your carefully tended flame illuminates possibilities that others might never have imagined, offers perspectives that can only emerge from your particular constellation of experiences and insights, provides a form of service that no one else can replicate. This understanding has freed you from the exhausting attempt to be useful to everyone and has allowed you to focus on being invaluable to those who can truly benefit from what you have to offer. You no longer scatter your energy like seeds thrown randomly on any available ground, but plant it carefully in the soil where it can take root and flourish. This selectivity, rather than limiting your impact, has actually amplified it by allowing your gifts to find their proper recipients. The role of guardian has also taught you about the cyclical nature of energy and the importance of honoring both the active and receptive phases of your flame's expression. There are times when your fire burns bright and high, when you feel called to share generously, to take on challenges, to extend yourself in service of meaningful projects. And there are times when the flame burns low and quiet, when you are called to retreat, to rest, to receive rather than give, to allow yourself to be refilled from the inexhaustible source. Learning to honor these natural rhythms without judgment has been crucial to your effectiveness as a guardian. You no longer force yourself to give when you need to receive, nor do you feel guilty for the periods of rest and restoration that are necessary for the flame to burn sustainably. You have discovered that what appears to be selfishness, this careful attention to your own energetic needs, is actually the foundation of all authentic generosity. As guardian of your own flame, you have also become a beacon for others who are beginning their own journey from depletion to wholeness. Your example gives them permission to value their own energy, to establish their own boundaries, to question the cultural assumptions that equate goodness with self-sacrifice. You do not preach these lessons but embody them, allowing others to witness what it looks like when someone takes full responsibility for their own well-being while remaining genuinely loving toward others. This is the eternal flame that burns within the sanctuary of your integrated being, not a flickering candle that can be easily extinguished by the winds of others' demands, but a steady fire that burns with the authority of someone who has learned to tend it wisely. In becoming the guardian of this flame, you have discovered that you are simultaneously serving your own highest potential and offering your greatest gift to the world. The light you protect and nurture within yourself is the same light that has always guided humanity through its darkest hours, the light of consciousness aware of itself, of individuality in service to the whole, of the eternal expressing itself through the temporal container of your unique and irreplaceable being.